vice chair of this committee, majority leader, and thank you for breakfast.
Oh, thank you for breakfast.
Thank you for breakfast. It was terrific.
And as the first pregnant legislator in probably 20 years, really fond of my OBGYNs right now at Maitri, and really appreciate the work that you do. So we have just a little bit of time to hear from you. We appreciate, we're doing a big housing bill. We want you to stay in the state. So we'd just love to hear from you, your experience, and what we can do to help you in this economy.
And can I tag on, we will be doing a big workforce development bill too, both of which affect your profession. And so, you know, at some point we'd love to hear about both those pieces, but we might have you back for the workforce bill.
Well, we just want to hear about whatever you want.
Yeah.
And we're the economic development committee.
But those are our two big issues.
So if you just introduce yourselves for the record, and
Yeah, sure.
My name's Lauren Gerden. I'm one of the OBGYN residents at the University of Vermont Medical Center.
where are you from?
I'm from Kansas.
Oh, wow.
Went to Vermont for medical school.
Great. And state. So
And state.
Great.
And I'm Sarah McShane. I'm a second year OBGYN resident physician at the University of Vermont Medical Center. And I come to Vermont from North Carolina. That's where I did my undergraduate and medical school training at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And then some of my clinical years in Western North Carolina, near Asheville.
Oh, great. So in the Appalachian.
Yeah.
I'm Gidendi Indig. I'm a second year resident at the University of Vermont, originally from Brooklyn, New York. I my undergrad there and then went to Michigan for med school and back Northeast for my residency.
Okay, very older.
And where in New York?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
And I'm Mackenzie Delzer. I'm also a second year OBGYN resident. These lovely ladies. I'm from Wisconsin, did medical school, undergrad, everything there. This was my first time out on the East Coast. It was great.
Wonderful. And some of you might stay. Oh, good. Okay.
Get there.
Yeah. So please just tell us, or were we going to ask questions, or were there?
They were gonna testify. They have a couple of comments about
Yes.
recruitment and retention.
Oh,
Great.
okay. Sorry, I didn't know if I was holding you back.
Okay.
Okay.
I can start.
Yes.
So thanks. I'd like to thank the committee for having us here and continue to support healthcare workforce development in the state. So I went to medical school here and I'm starting my 4 years of OBGYN residency training here. And I think doing all of your medical training in a place, there are a lot of advantages to then staying and establishing your medical career here in terms of familiarity with the patient population as well as professional connections you make during your training. Unfortunately, Larner College of Medicine at UVM is one of the more expensive medical schools in the country, especially for out-of-state tuition. And living and training in Burlington for 8 years is an expensive thing to do, and for how proportionally how big Burlington is. So I do think continued competitive loan forgiveness for young physicians as well as competitive physician salaries is something that makes sense to me. That would be important for recruiting young physicians to come to Vermont, and then also for retaining the healthcare workforce who live here and train here and are here already. This is also particularly important because Vermont has an aging primary care practitioner population, and it would be important to have good adult primary care as well as comprehensive protected OBGYN care in terms of recruiting families to move here and have a safe place to build their family, as well as retaining young people who are here and thinking of setting roots and growing their families here. So thank you for your continued support.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Is there anything personal you'd want to, I mean, I don't want you to have to get too personal, but, you know, is there a clinic you're looking at or some opportunity that is harder to achieve here because of the debt or?
Yeah, I think I'm from Kansas, which is different in a lot of ways, but the compensation in Kansas is pretty good because it has to be, because it's nobody really wants to move there.
On the other hand, you have a lot bigger population.
And here the compensation is different and it's a higher cost of living. So I think that duo makes it hard. And it's a choice you're making in terms of where you want to be, but also then ramifications for, retirement and the debt you already have and building your family and buying a house and all that good stuff.
Yes.
Just a question about, are you able to become familiar with other parts of the state? Because there are very different costs in
Yes.
other parts of the state.
Yeah, we do, actually tomorrow I'm going to outreach clinic in Rutland. So we do go to Rutland sometimes, and Porter and Millbury.
And CDMC,
CDMC.
sometimes we go.
Brattleboro's.
Yeah, you need to come to the east side of Vermont.
Yeah.
Windsor, Wyndham, Northeast Kingdom, all of which need you maybe even more than Chittenden County.
Right, and they really appreciate their doctors there.
Springfield is not doing deliveries.
Yeah.
You
I
have to
heard-
drive to Rutland
Or DHMC, or Valley,
or Gifford.
or
They
Gifford,
come up.
or
to
Gifford. Gifford
Red
has a great program.
Yeah, and I live in Franklin County, and so,
Okay.
I get to experience life outside of Chittenden County, just on a personal
There is
level.
life in Franklin County.
Randy will attest to it.
I went a little bit of a different direction. I wanted to first thank this committee for your attention and dedication to supporting the growth and evolution of Vermont's healthcare workforce as we prepare to care for the future needs of this state as things are changing. And specifically, I feel like your work to support scholarships and expanded training programs and loan repayment or forgiveness options are really valuable in retaining and supporting both physicians, but also nurses and other allied health professionals who already love Vermont and want to stay here. Personally, I first became interested in rural healthcare as a medical student in Western North Carolina on rotations in family medicine and OBGYN clinics that were outside of Asheville in rural Appalachia. I was part of a rural scholars recruitment program that both financially and programmatically supported the growth of young physicians that were interested in rural health, and specifically there with the aging rural workforce and thinking about replacing retiring physicians in these rural communities. It became a really strong priority to recruit and grow physicians that wanted to come to these small towns and support the vitality of the towns and those critical access hospitals. And to me, it seems that there's a lot of similarities between rural Appalachia and Vermont, as Vermont is primarily a very rural state. And so it got me thinking about how this North Carolina program that included mentorship, it included experiences in rural programs and clinics, and then also financial incentives along the way that aided physicians that wanted to take these jobs in more rural locations that might come along with a lower compensation and increased challenges as far as resources available in those places could be useful here. And I think it ties in that my love of the rural communities and my experience in North Carolina and love of the outdoors and kind of connection to those things is actually a lot of what led me to Vermont. And one of my favorite parts in my job here. I think we have the privilege of, as UVM being the catchment center for all of rural Vermont and where we get a lot of transports from these smaller hospitals, we get to know all of the different kind of flavors of Vermont, from our Vermont family farmers to our new Americans who are living here. And I could really see myself staying and practicing here. So, thinking about myself, but also thinking about my fellow physicians and colleagues, our medical students who are coming through now, but also our nursing students and our mental health workers and all of the people that we work with on teams on the day-to-day that really make us function well. I think that thinking about how we can build scholarships and training programs and kind of accelerate people's training to reach them here is really important. And so I think programs like the one that I experienced in North Carolina, or like the Vermont Primary Care Scholarship, are important things for us to think about as we think about the future of our healthcare workforce and recruitment. And so I really thank you for your attention and dedication and commitment to this.
Okay. We have about 3 minutes left. Was there anything you two wanted to say before we have a couple questions?
Just echoing what the shows have already said, I think, and unless you have something to say, I think we can move into questions.
Yeah, we're here to support our colleagues and echo what they said. Really that physicians are part of a big team, and across the team, there's been challenges related to workforce retention and keeping our really experienced seasoned staff, which is deeply impacted the quality of care we can provide, and focusing on those efforts of retaining these people out of our workforce is integral to promoting the health of the people in Vermont.
Absolutely. So do you mean nurses and techs?
Nurses, techs, like PAs, all like everybody who's on the team.
Jill,
So I was gonna say that Mindy and Mackenzie just testified in Senate Health and Welfare on S37, which is the bill that would protect healthcare providers that provide abortion care and
Our Shield
birth
bill.
care.
Which is on the floor
Shield
today.
bill. And so that's also a workforce development bill, if you think about it, in terms of providers feeling safe that they can practice here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all of us talked about how a part of our residency selection as an OBGYN has to involve careful planning of the state climate and why we are so privileged to work in Vermont because of these protections. We're excited for these protections to continue.
That's how many of us landed here to begin with.
Wow.
That's interesting.
So it's a good workforce pipeline to have good laws that protect reproductive
Very
care.
much so.
And now we want to keep you here.
Yeah.
We
That's
have
terrific.
time for one more question. Or we could stay on time, which is really nice. But I really appreciate this, and I think the committee does. I know it's really nice to hear from our future workforce and people who are dedicating so many years. Right, exactly, dedicating all this time to the practice.
And actually, it would be really helpful to have your testimony, if you don't mind typing it up and sending it to Scott, our assistant. That would be really useful to have in
I'd be
our,
happy to.
yeah, because we're gonna dive into the workforce fairly soon after crossover. So
Please do stay in touch through Jill about what will keep you here. We're looking at strengthening primary care, housing, affordability. We know the job opportunities are actually there right now, and we want to help keep people here and make you feel welcome.
and join the 251 club, because then you'll explore all the other towns.
It's
and
252 now.
Now 252 club. I know, they still haven't changed their sign yesterday. So that you can get to know the rest of the state, because many of us represent different parts of the state
And each town has its own personality too, they really do.
and its own needs.
Thank you for choosing
Thank you.
Vermont.
Yeah,
Thank you for the work you
thank
do.
you for having us tonight.
Well, it's great to have.
Thank you.
And Scott, you have your card to get them.
Your I can connect them.
Yes, that would be
Jill's
great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm impressed you have any time to go and explore the outside.
I think Amanda is in the hall.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, you put a mask on and we talked in the hallway. Okay. I'm losing my mind.
I'll take my mic. Over there.
Yeah, take your time. Do you need to connect to our Zoom?
I think you all can see it. It's a little PowerPoint on the two slides.
Okay.
Great. And if you send them to Scott, make sure Scott has. them.
Yes.
To see that. Yeah, great.
Thanks.
That's what's not making sense. Oh, they're great.
Now I recognize you.
The dance witness chair is
Yes, I know.
They
It's
don't
supposed to be
swap.
like a nice witness chair, but it also makes people have to like shuffle.
I feel a little short.
You can pop it up, actually, if you
Well,
want.
let's,
Some of us have it popped up and have a footstool so our feet can hit something.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Do I start now?
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so for the record, my name is Amanda Garces. I am the Director of Policy, Education and Outreach for the Vermont Human Rights Commission. Very pleased to be here. I haven't met some of you, so thank you for having us. And today I just wanted to give a little overview about the Human Rights Commission. There's a section 20 of your own House bill has some changes for the HRC. And briefly, I just want to say that we kind of support the intent of the bill, but we support extending the statute of limitations an additional 90 days
but we strongly believe that the HRC should be given more support rather than allowing it the discretion to defer to the state attorney's office for the attorney general's office. So I'm going to tell you why we need the support and how the HRC functions a little bit. The HRC has been the chosen entity to enforce these laws because it is independent. And so we would like to see that continue. And we do have a lot of impacted communities that trust the HRC. And if you do move forward with this, you know, we get to hear from them. This is something they would. So we enforce 3 anti-discrimination laws: the Fair Employment Practices Act, which is for state employees. So any time anyone is discriminated against goes through the HRC. If they work for private employers, then they go to the Attorney General's office. So the teachers go through there and anybody that works for a private employer. We also oversee some of it around workers' conditions, workers' compensation, if they are retaliated against, if they file parental leave or something like that, they also come to us. The HRC is the only agency that enforces the Fair Housing Act, and that is self-explanatory. Any time there's discrimination around housing, or there's landlords, or there's tenant-to-tenant harassment, they come to us. And then we have, in Vermont, we have like a very broad definition of public accommodation. So we oversee the Public Accommodations Act, that includes schools, cases from inmates, police brutality, police staff cases. We have a large increase of school cases. And I know you've heard this presentation already in your other committee, so I'll make it short. So those are the 3 laws. We also oversee some of the gender neutral bathrooms that are from Act 127. And so we see that. And then in that little PowerPoint, you'll see a lot of our protected categories, which is a lot that we see. So it's like we focus on a lot of issues, and you know, a lot of protection. So how we do the enforcement, we receive a complaint. Those complaints get moved to one of our 3 attorney investigators that we have. They do the investigation. In that meantime, they try to conciliate, do settlements. If that doesn't work through, then it goes to a report where they will write up whether they find discrimination or not. And it goes to our 5 commissioners who are appointed by the governor. There, they look at the cases. They meet once a month, and then they decide whether they uphold whatever the investigator says, whether it's discrimination or not. And if that's the case, it goes back to our executive director desk, where she tries to negotiate. If those don't work, then we go through litigation. That's where we need more support right now. So our executive director wears many hats. She's the litigator, executive director. She does all kinds of things. So
Advocacy, we ask her to come in all the time.
Yeah, she does. Exactly. So we think that in order we need to kind of test things in courts. Right now, last year we had some money that was allocated for the HRC for litigation to contract out with some law firms. So they have a few of our cases that were litigated in court right now. And but I think that it's important to have our own litigator that can really serve the mission of the organization. It's very different to contract out with big law firms who really, you know, they're great. And I think we need someone in-house that can really test the course, someone that knows how to move the cases, who, you know, like knows the whole picture of our jurisdiction. So that is, I can go on and on about why we need it, but so that's what we're saying. Yeah.
So just to that point, and I assume I asked you this in GovOps as well, Amanda. What is in the governor's budget? Is your ask actually in the governor's budget? has he responded to your request?
You know what, Bora's on vacation right now, and she's gonna be testifying in appropriations on the 14th.
And she, because you're independent, you're able to ask for what you want, not what the administration is encouraging you to ask for.
Correct, so, I'm not sure, so Bora's on vacation. So yes, I believe there is some ask around litigation. fees.
Yes, because she's long needed
Yes.
another litigator.
Yeah, right, and it probably helps if we have a recommendation to appropriations on this. And Amanda doesn't need to be the one to say this, Bora's on vacation, but you know, when this proposal came to us from the working group, you know, we've heard a lot about the Human Rights Commission hadn't been consulted, so the language that we had, you know, sort of didn't reflect what their on the ground experiences with how to manage and ameliorate fair housing disputes and issues. So I'd much rather honor what the HRC wants and needs to deal with fair housing complaints, which we can also try to have Bora in later, but you know, I talked to the fair housing folks at Vermont Legal Aid quite a bit. We have fair housing issues. I mean, we have, you know, that can be both de facto and de jure discrimination. Someone blatantly sort of, people feeling like when I went in person, they treated me very differently than when they just saw an email from me, or, you know, looking at the bigger picture, is the community engaged in the kind of planning and zoning that keeps people out? And so I just wonder if you thought you might be able to get a litigator with the expertise to look at bigger, you know, the kind of like, my book's falling over, but you know, the big de jure discrimination where it's like, well, it takes a little longer to put all the pieces together, that this is, why does Burlington have so few Black homeowners? You know, why do we have a racial homeownership gap? Where can we look at systems that aren't working?
Yes, and Bora and I went to the fair housing, it was actually a conference in August where it was all the human rights commissions of the country, and there's a lot of things we could be doing and like thinking about like systemic pieces around lending, like what is happening with like the algorithms that are used for credit checks for that, you know, like there's discrimination being found in a lot of places around that. So like we don't even, you know, have the capacity right now to be like, let's look at that. I'm like, I was really fascinated by it. I'm like, we should be looking at it. Like, what is the in practice, what's happening? And I know that you've heard from Anna that came to testify a couple of weeks ago or like last week. I've been listening to
Yes,
Anna,
Anna, that was a couple
you know, about her experience there. Last year, there was a few other BIPOC people that came to testify around like their experience. I think it's really important to kind of think through the systemic issues. Our office and the Office of Racial Equity are doing together a tour around the state starting in May, where we're going to be for 6 counties. We're going to be doing a fair housing presentation. We had a grant with HUD that helped us translate our fair housing laws into plain language and then into 13 languages. So that's going to be public in the next few weeks. And then we're going to be doing a tour, doing a fair housing presentation. So we see through that outreach work that we're doing that we're going to bring a lot more cases. So like it's going to be the support, and the attorneys that we do have work extremely hard. And you know, it's hard cases. I think that there's, you know, focus on tenant harassment is also like one issue that we're looking at. So
please share with us the fair housing information in multiple languages so we can help get that.
I'm really excited about that. We have a ASL language, a video that like translated the whole thing. So it's like,
yeah, and yesterday we had our language access, the work bill you and I worked on.
Okay.
Was your bill was that. Well, you were in another committee being busy. We had a joint hearing with House GovOps and heard Susanna and Jay present the report. So it was great, but it's those kind of vital documents that are going to be, and there's a definite appropriation for that work.
That's work. Yeah,
that's a lot.
We had a grant from HUD to do that translation. That was about $7,000 to just do the translation to plain language to 13 languages.
And this is just one commission as
I
opposed
know.
to all the agencies and departments who
Learning
have
to plan.
documents that need to be translated.
Yeah. This is only one statute too.
And there's only one set.
Yeah. And as I've always said, the plain language is one of the most critical pieces. It helps everyone understand what we're talking about. All these documents are hard to read. Any other questions for Amanda? We've been communicating with War, but please tell her you did great and she should enjoy her vacation. And I think right as she gets back, we might try to have her in, but this was extremely helpful.
Yeah, I think just as we look at our fair housing work,
Yeah.
Amanda, it would be wonderful if you could give us a notion of how many cases you have a year, how many Fair Housing Act cases you take on a year, and how you split that with legal aid, because I know legal aid does some, I think,
So,
and the division of labor on that, I think, is useful.
so the HRC is an independent agency, so we don't represent anybody that comes through, right? So some of the legal aid cases, they represent their clients and they come to the HRC to file the claim.
Oh, so you work in concert.
We work in concert, so like the attorney has the client and then they file a complaint at the HRC. And then I send our 2022 annual report that has some of the data around
Oh, you sent it.
statistics, yes.
Okay.
Sorry. I
No,
sent it,
we're a kind of like hybrid committee, you know, I always look at our.
I send it right before I get.
So legal aid would ask you to litigate.
So legal aid will file a claim. We don't represent the people who are filing the claim, they're representing them. And then the investigator's independent, they do all the investigation. And then at the end, the person that is the company has attorneys. So when we find reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination occurred and the commissioners say, yes, this is the case, then at no point we are the lawyers for the person, right? Like at no point we represent them, we represent the HRC. So like when
We're
we go,
quasi judicial.
exactly, so when we go to court to do a litigation of a case on fair housing, we are not the attorneys of the claimant.
So the legal aid continues to be the attorney of
If they
the.
choose to do that, yes, if they choose to do that. So for housing, we had about 10 cases for disability, 6 for sex, 4 for retaliation, 7 for public assistance, 3 for race, 2 for national origin, 3 for victims of abuse, 1 for gender identity, 1 for religion, 1 for marital status. Those were the cases that we saw in 2022. I can send you like historical, if you would like that.
That would be great. I think it's just useful to have.
Would that also show the disposition of the cases?
No. Well, these are the reasonable grounds cases that we found. There's other cases that were settled.
But if we want to know essentially what happened to things that are filed with the commission, how did they deal with it? What was the end result of the work that you did? How would we know that?
I mean, we can send, there's so many cases, like the specifics, some are confidential. Well, once they found reasonable grounds, it's public information. Yeah.
So those that you found reasonable grounds, what's happened to them?
Like penalty or.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to know
Have they
who
been
it was. We
settled?
just need to know, was it settled?
Has
Was
some
it?
penalty assessed? What's happened as an end result of your intervention?
Yeah, so a lot of times there's money that's allocated for people who lose the case. A lot of times the settlement has a shift in policies, in procedures. So like I can write up some with like very specific case of what those outcomes are. But yes, usually if we go to litigation, there could be money allocated for the complainants through the settlement. Some of the the complainants will get some money in the settlement. Some others, there's no money. There's just like policy changes. In fair housing, a lot of people need to take the fair housing training in order, as part of the settlement agreement, so that they learn how to not discriminate, things like that. So I could write up something where you'll have a specific outcomes of some of the cases if you want it just for housing or, different related, but.
Great. This has been really helpful. This section deserves its own attention, and we appreciate you coming in on this, and we'll stay in touch as, we redraft it.
Thank you.
Yes, and talk to our colleagues in probation. And we'll try to have more input. You again, you did a great job, and we hope she's enjoying a well-deserved
Yes,
vacation.
well deserved. Well deserved.
Mr. Pete, thanks for joining us virtually.
Good morning.
I don't want us to sort of fill out all over the place, but after you speak, we have committee discussion, and we're having a lot of discussion about the section that you may have heard about.
Okay.
Around AD owner occupation, the definitions of complexes and ADUs. And as you may have heard, we've looked at recent New York Times articles and just heard anecdotally, thank you. That it can be a dampening effect on the creation of an ADU, even taking the money to build an ADU. We're, also, as we know, an ADU can be a partition of your existing footprint or a separate detached building. So we're just looking at all of that in relation to, if we keep the owner occupation requirement in place, does that have the kind of dampening effect or particular real estate and legal ramifications after that person tries to sell their property? So that's one of the issues we're dealing with, but we haven't talked to my knowledge, of someone who hangs a shingle out as a real estate lawyer beyond our attorneys here. So if you've had the opportunity to look at other pieces of the bill you want to comment on, please do.
Sure. Well, thank you. And is everyone able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Except we're hearing you back there, so we keep looking away from you to hear you.
All right, well, thank you. And I do appreciate the opportunity to speak via Zoom. That's very helpful. And thank you for including me today. As you may know, I'm a real estate attorney. Our practice is dedicated to helping people buy and sell their homes. So we're down in the trenches doing the daily work of helping folks when they're buying or selling their homes.
And where are you based?
We have offices in South Burlington and White River Junction. So we have actually a statewide practice. We cover all of Vermont. We have a team of 7 attorneys and a lot of paralegals, and we travel throughout the state helping people buy and sell their homes. So, so as a part of that process, we need to conduct title searches, to verify that a property has good title. And things that we're going to be looking for are things that you're talking about today with this bill. That a prospective buyer is going to want to know if there are restrictions on a property, if there's a requirement for it to be owner occupied, or if there's a restriction on temporary rentals. Those are things that hopefully there's a mechanism in place for us to find that as a part of the title search, and then be able to report it to a prospective buyer. And then the prospective buyer can then make a decision if they want to buy a property with these restrictions or not. And that I suspect there'll be a certain number of people that be unwilling to proceed with purchasing if there are restrictions on our property. And there are some that'll, the restrictions will be fine and they'll proceed and it won't be a problem necessarily. But there's also the lenders to consider as well. A lot of times we work with mortgage lenders. Most people need to obtain a mortgage to purchase a property, and the lenders come through with closing instructions for us that say oftentimes that no subordinate financing can be allowed. And the lender also receives a copy of our title report. So they're going to see whatever restrictions may be placed on a property, and then the lender needs to make an underwriting decision if they're willing to live with these restrictions as well, because they need to know that the property, the value of the property with these restrictions are such that it supports, supports the loan as collateral, and that they won't have an undue burden in trying to sell the property in the event they have to foreclose. So I think a lender should also be brought into the thinking of this and how they might react to any of these restrictions as well. It's important to have a mechanism in place, I think, to be sure that as a title searcher, we can find these restrictions. And the best place to do that is with the land records. And I see in the bill, there's a provision for a lien. And, that lien should be recorded in the land records, which is fine. And then, a prospective buyer and lender can decide if they want to live with that lien or require it to be paid off and released prior to closing. But if there are restrictions that are going to be imposed that, survive the release of that lien or survive the expiration of this program, it's very important that those also be entered into the land records in a way that we can find them, separate and apart from that lien. And if there are restrictions you want to impose into perpetuity, we want to probably also require that language be added to the deed to that property going forward for the future conveyances, so it's right in the deed to see the restriction. With a title search, we only search back statutorily to 40 years. And if you have a restriction in place that's going to last longer than 40 years, then it should probably be a requirement to add it to the deed, so it gets carried forward each time the property is conveyed, so that future buyers can know and won't be surprised by these restrictions later.
Can I pause you to ask
Sure,
a question?
yes.
Maybe you were going to get.
Certainly.
So one of the things we've been contemplating, because a lien in perpetuity, or that kind of encumbrance in perpetuity, does seem to present some kind of issue. We'd love to hear if you've felt like that has been a hindrance to people, but also if we tried to compromise it in some way and say, okay, this owner occupation restriction lasts for X number of years or until this property is sold to a new buyer, the deed is transferred. I don't know the legal language for that. Is that possible, or does that also make it additionally complicated?
Can I just tag on? I mean, we're also
Sure.
protecting a public investment here.
But that's,
Right.
so that's the lien of the 50,000. So we could also say that ends when the 50,000.
It wouldn't end, it would have to be paid back. So if a new owner,
Okay.
yeah, I would want to see, so this is a discussion, because for some people, it makes it a house affordable. So for the lender
Right.
who's looking at it, they see a unit in it that somebody's income may not actually be able to support the purchase of the house, but the income from the rental unit adds to the people's income ability. Many people have said this helps as they look at properties that may be slightly above their means, but they can afford with that rental unit.
Right.
So there's that for the lenders, but also we want to protect the money, and if the public money, and if somebody is going to buy it and take that ADU off the open market for a full-time rental, the state should be being paid back for whatever appropriate percent number of years later should be paid back to the state.
And I just want to clarify it is different, the people who enter the program to get 50,000 than our requirement that all ADUs be.
Correct,
owner
but
occupied.
if the lien is only there if they take public money.
Is that true?
Well, I presume that a lien would be recorded if they're taking public money.
It has to be paid back.
Right, so
But I mean, beyond that, then there is really no way for us to know or care if an ADU is owner occupied.
yes, well.
That's sort of a town issue.
Well,
Well,
I mean, look,
also
He's-
the issue of a public building. And if there are fire code requirements for something that is being rented to the public that there isn't if you're just putting up an accessory dwelling unit for your elderly parents. So I don't know, when you go to sell and you've got a mother-in-law apartment, but it's not sprinkled and it doesn't have an exit from the third floor. I think, and I'm a retired realtor, I'm looking at Peter. I don't know that I could advertise that. I think I've done one that it couldn't be advertised as an apartment. You know, we get,
Yeah.
this is neither fish nor
We're gonna
fowl.
find out.
And we're
As you
getting,
can see, we're
yeah.
really deep in the weeds here.
Yeah.
And
We're gonna find out.
yeah, any clarity,
On that issue.
you know, as you have walked through these, like the stories you've heard, you know, that how this has looked or hasn't looked, you know.
Well, you know, as a part of our title search, you know, we're looking at a number of things. You know, we want to see there's clear title, and the, you know, the more restrictions you put on a property, you know, the less clear the title is. And then, you know, buyers and lenders then need to make a decision. And there are good points that, you know, this program in creating additional rental income helps make a borrower a stronger borrower with that income. But a lender is also wanting to look to see that the property supports the loan as collateral. So these restrictions, you know, impede the lender's view of the value of the property. So it kind of cuts both ways. And you know, there's a concept of, you know, fee simple title. And, you know, when we see, you know, a property being benefited, you know, it's understandable that there'd be some restrictions and, you know, an obligation to repay if the restrictions aren't met. But, you know, to have them work into perpetuity beyond the expiration of the program benefits, you know, that starts, I think, impacting more of the value of the property and how buyers and lenders may view it. So, you know, those are things certainly for you folks to consider.
Can we write in a timeline? I mean, is that something you see commonly that,
Yeah.
oh, it looks like for a while this had an owner occupation requirement and that's gone now?
Yes, to have it expire. And I think, you know, just for ease of administering and for us doing title searches, you know, if any of these restrictions were to expire simultaneous with the lien expiring, then everything could be done with one document recorded in the land records that, you know, the lien is imposed and it appears that it phases out in time and eventually it can be released. And I think having all these restrictions, you know, released at the same moment in time may be something to consider. So.
Yeah.
A model we could use is you can now get down payment assistance, which came, I think, from VHFA,
Mhm.
but it was paid off every 5 years you lived there, a percentage. The deal was you were going to live there for 15 years because we didn't want people buying and flipping houses. So when we sold my daughter's house as part of the closing, that lien was paid off, and yeah, I paid it to VHFA, at which point, you know, their goal was to keep her there for 15 years. That was her intention. And that's probably the simplest way. We're giving you this amount of money on condition that you live in the house. The minute you don't live in the house, we could put a time frame on it, but upon sale of the house, the minute you don't live in the house, and that will get hard because who's policing whether or not I'm living there or if I'm going to Florida for the winter.
Right.
But set it up so that when the house changes hands, the lien or whatever is left of it is paid off and the next person starts free and clear. And if they want to rent out the room, they
The
can
apartment,
do
it's an apartment.
the apartment. But it's not, it's,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a
It's a
subsidiary,
subordinate,
subordinate apartment.
which just means the size.
But that would be the simplest way to try and preserve this in perpetuity.
Right.
Would,
Is a transfer of property simpler than a 15-year timeline? Or could it be like whichever is longer, or is that much more complicated?
I think having it tied to the lien release would make the most sense. So to have differing times would be complicated, and a mistake could easily be made. They see the lien is expired, but these restrictions live on a little bit longer. That would be confusing, I think, to folks. That you could do it all in one document, and maybe even give people an option for an early out. That if they decide they no longer want to live under these restrictions, they can pay the money back or pay some portion of it back and have the lien and the
I was just
restrictions
exploring
released.
all the possibilities, and if you said this expires in 15 years, let's say you sold it in 7 years, and you said to the next person, you actually have to live here for 8 years or something, that's way too complicated, right? Like,
oh, yeah.
Well,
it's not gonna be possible.
that could be done, and you could give the buyer.
Well, I just,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
You give the buyer an option, they can negotiate to pay off the remaining balance on the lien and have all the restrictions released, or the buyer can say, oh, I can live with these restrictions, and if I can get a break on the price because of this program, I'm willing to live with it for the balance of the program period. So it could do it, you can have it work both ways.
Senator Brock, did you?
No, I agree.
Okay.
You're also, I think, gonna have to allow an opt-out, which doesn't have to go in your lien, but I might think this is a really good idea. Until I've got 3 kids and I really would like that extra room, or I really don't like sharing my house with other people. It's just not working for me. And I think on both ends, you've got to give people.
But the out might be like a small penalty or something to remove the lien.
Yeah, I mean, there should be a way if it doesn't work out.
I
Right.
think it's a buyout. I think it's the same thing. I think it's equitable. If you use public money to enhance your house in some capacity,
Well, I still think there should be a time frame, or not like 100 years later you still have to.
There won't.
so I have to be
$40,000.
reminded what our lien is, how many years it is.
We get too many restrictions, they won't use our money.
Just make it simple.
Yeah.
Change the title, and that's it.
I mean, frankly, I think we should have done this honestly when we created the program, so I don't know.
The fire safety
We're
issue and
yeah.
public building issue is a separate issue.
It is, it is
But
in the
that's one
governor's.
that ultimately the
Yeah.
buyer is going to have, assuming
Right.
it's a change of title,
Yeah.
or the owner wants to change the rules. And the question is, do we allow the owner to do a buyout and change the rules? Who's receive public money for that?
So
That's another
That's
decision.
another question. Let's find out from David and from Alan about the length of the lien that's currently in law, and we can go from there. This is not that difficult. I think we can find that out and make a decision. I think those are 2 good options for, I think this is very helpful, Fred,
To the
give us, then have the restrictions expire at the same time as the lien. It makes a lot of sense.
We do
That you
that
have
with
that
current
you
use.
have a buyout option and or
Well-
just go through the life of the lien.
Senator Cookson, I just want to point out, part of the point of this was to get rid of all owner occupation requirements and all ADUs, whether they took the $50,000.
That was your objective. My objective in writing the law last year was to make sure that
But
owners
We have
are
to, we
occupied.
need to still talk about the situation where they didn't take our public money.
No, then they're able to do whatever they're able to do. It's their house.
But
It's an
it has an
Airbnb.
owner occupation requirement.
For all ADUs, whether they take
Yes,
our money
we
or
haven't
not.
carved that out in the duplexing by right,
Right,
because you
got
wanted that definition,
Yeah.
so.
That's part of the definition.
So what do you think of, do we remove the owner occupation requirement on those and keep the lien for if they took public money? Sorry, I was asking you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking.
Oh, okay.
I'm
No, I
looking
mean,
at red, waiting for an answer.
Yeah, I guess, say, Mr. Pete, we left aside the $50,000 that people might have gotten that placed a lien on their property. right now in statute, ADUs are,
Owner
this
occupied.
bill would still require ADUs to be treated separately as duplexes per a particular request that we've had. And I'm just wondering if there's no lien for an amount of money, does that just sort of I mean, we could be leaving it up to the towns, right? This state statute could be silent on owner occupation rather than kind of pro owner occupation. And if we leave it silent, towns could be deciding community by community whether or not they want to have an owner occupation restriction on ADUs. The original, I think, proposal in the bill was not requiring owner occupation.
In this bill, but, and I don't actually know when that definition of ADU was put in place, whether it was original to the ADUs in 1992, or whether it was, we added last year, I'm unclear on that, but that has been the definition of ADUs, that they were owner occupied.
Do you see, like, I know Burlington, Brattleboro, they have owner occupation restriction. They've tried to be, supportive of ADUs, but they have owner occupation restriction. Have you just seen those come through, whether or not anyone took this new public money? Have you seen those complicate things for people?
So I don't think I've seen this issue come up in actual transactions, so I'm not sure I have a lot of experience to share with you about it, but I can see it being a concern. Certainly if it presented. So
I have one in my district that has been sold, and I could find out who the lawyer was.
Okay.
Let's see.
So, I mean, just hypothetically, if someone came in and they said, I live in Burlington, we have this owner occupation requirement, I want to sell my house. I have an ADU. They didn't take any public money for it. They just have an ADU and they live in Burlington and they want to sell it to someone who would then, if they wanted to rent it and get income, would have to live there.
Right, and that may be the town's requirement, right? The town may require that.
Is that, do you do the same sort of calculation you've already told us about? There's no lien necessarily.
Yeah, there's no lien, and it's just a matter of the attorney knowing what the local zoning ordinances that may impose that restriction. And I think, it's entirely possible that a lot of these pass through with, not being caught, that is a potential issue. So I'm not sure how often it may occur where both units end up being rented, but I think that's entirely possible.
Right.
No, because we're talking about subordinate sections within a house, but we are also talking a subordinate house in the backyard, which at least is different. You're talking about a building that is removed from the primary building. And that's gonna, I think, it's just a different visual when you're buying a house with an accessory room that you can
reconnect.
You can turn it into a sports betting room or something on the internet. But when there's another
off-track betting, I'm sure the neighborhood will love that.
Well, you can, it's your house.
But it's a neighborhood, as you have already identified.
Yeah, but it is your house and you rule. But if it's an accessory unit in the backyard, they're talking mini houses. That's a different,
like a carriage house that is a
carriage house that gets
rented.
a carriage house, or because that's a big old house.
Yeah.
Or you just built a new duplex. We left them off duplexes.
They still have to be subordinate in size.
Yes, subordinate in size, but it is a separate.
It can be a freestanding unit.
Yes,
That's right.
a separate building. That's going to get a little more complicated.
I'm not sure it's that much more complicated from a legal point of view.
And I am to add on to that. Sorry, Mr. P, you're probably, this is a lot, but let's say there's a renter there who has like a lease, do those just get terminated?
Yeah, leases go with the property, right?
Yep.
That's a good point. That's how you would find out.
Yeah.
That
Right.
there was that encumbrance.
Yeah, if it's a rental unit, and I assume that then makes it a public building because it's a separate building.
Mhm.
It's a rental unit. If you're renting month to month, everything ends at transaction. If there's a lease, the lease goes with the unit. So when it's sold, the occupant still has, I think I'm remembering my courses correctly. The occupant still has the remainder of the 5-year lease or what, 3 year,
Okay.
1 year, whatever it is.
Okay.
You know, properties
you
are
get- you
sold
get-
subject to leases all the time. We commonly do that and we adjust for the rent and transfer the security deposit, and it's very commonly done.
That's
Okay.
Yes. This is not
Yes.
difficult.
Oh, we should have done it with the original bill. Is there any other clarity people need?
No,
Yeah.
so just to confirm my
Recap.
understanding,
Yeah.
so if the unit is rented, a potential buyer of that property, the unit and the main house, a potential buyer of that, of those one property, 2 buildings on it, or I'm just gonna say
The
2
subordinate-
units,
the
2 units
subordinate.
would know because they would be advised of the rental agreement. They would know that that exists. So
Unless it was a month to month.
Yeah, but well, if it's a month to month, you'd know that.
you probably know it
That would
existed.
be a disclosure and you would have to, and
You
if
have
your
to just
leases
come
are
to a
coming
decision.
up, your realtor would probably advise you not to sign another lease until the building is sold.
Right, but the realtor wouldn't necessarily know about the condition of owner occupancy.
Yeah, they would, if they were selling an ADU, they would know this, because realtors are smart.
Right, but there wouldn't be a document to show them that, to bring it to their
Well, there would be
attention.
a town zoning ordinance.
There's a,
Right, but they don't go through ordinances.
but the deed should,
Yeah,
ideally a
good
deed has it.
Realtor
and it
knows.
is.
Right.
Yeah, generally.
Okay, so they'll just know it because it'll be part of the zoning ordinance.
I don't even want to bring up just cause eviction at Burlington. I would just skip past that, but is that,
They'll know it.
I mean, did those bills take into account if it's sold, then you're no longer a just cause, you're just.
I don't believe, yeah, do you want me to?
Yeah, sorry, Peter
Yeah, so
Tucker.
Peter Tucker for the
Yeah.
Vermont Association of Realtors. I don't believe so. I mean, and I think you've got 2 questions here. One is, if there's a lien on the property, we know if we can dispose of that at the time of sale, that seems to clear that up. But the language about, an ADU having a owner occupied main unit is a different question. And I think that's the hard question of the 2, because, how long's it been in statute? And, quite honestly, I don't know that there's a mechanism to really record that and keep track of
Yeah,
it, when it transfers,
If it's in a deed, it's in a deed. It
Why
transfers.
would it be in
Well,
a deed?
This
But
restriction is
But
not
either-
entered into a deed.
But, it-
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the.
A zoning restriction is not copied into a deed.
Oh, okay.
The lien would be attached to the
Right.
deed.
Right.
That's the public
Right.
money.
Right, but, so they're different questions.
Yeah.
I think. And the one thing that Fred pointed out earlier that I think is really, does go to, let's solve this at the time of sale, is, a bank making a loan for that new buyer is gonna be feeling much better about not having liens attached to a property that they're gonna, take on.
But that's not what I understood Fred to say. I understood Fred to say that ideally they'd have restrictions expire at the time of, all the restrictions would expire at the same time.
Right,
So that
right.
that's at
So
the
the
end of
lien
the
and
lien.
owner occupation.
If
So the buyer can have the option
Right.
of either buying out the lien or just living with it
Right.
as the lien until the
But
lien expires.
Peter was just saying if we
But-
didn't do that,
But-
then.
But both the buyer and the lender have a say.
It may be fine for the buyer, but it may not be fine for the lender.
That's right.
Exactly.
But they'll work it out. I mean, I figure that's part of the
Let
negotiation.
him eat cake.
No, they'll figure, I mean, I don't think this is that hard. but
Well, I think we should be clear for the
Yes.
law, you know.
And let's
I think
find
that's
out,
the
let's
problem.
find out when the ADU definition was put in the statute. I can't remember if we did it in 20 or, 19, 20, 21, or whether it was in 1992.
Okay.
We'll find
Is
that out.
there an owner
2006.
occupancy piece in our
2006.
statute?
Thank you.
That's just wrong. And
Owner
if
occupied
so,
has been
that
in
just
this
strikes me as
wet
being
sand
very
kind of
problematic.
Yeah, I think so.
That strikes me as very
But-
problematic, that an owner occupancy in our existing statute has implications to property transfer.
Into perpetuity.
And I think we need to clarify that.
Mhm. Yeah,
That's
And
why
I-
I say it's a different question.
It's a
Yeah,
good question, but it's an important question as part of this bill.
everything should expire, really, we can't put that.
On-
kind of-
yeah. because I think that probably went in, just looking at the rapidity with which Montpelier has adopted an ADU zoning, when they have not been receptive to building anything. It's seen as a way that without creating apartments, people could take somebody in. The owner occupancy stops the, somebody buying it and renting out the main house on
Right.
Airbnb and then making, a couple other units. It limits it. But if we're putting liens on it and requiring it, and it becomes a public building up for rent, I think that's going to make it much less desirable to neighborhoods that are concerned about the character of their neighborhoods. I think you'll get more pushback, because where we're going is we're saying this is essentially an apartment. And it's going to be governed by apartment rules.
Right, but we haven't put those necessarily in, and this language and this definition has been in since 2006.
Yeah, okay, and how many
And I
ADUs are there?
And I think before we get frustrated about what's required of that apartment,
Yeah.
I think we should hear from Mike DeBrocher tomorrow. So I think we should
Yeah, that's
suspend,
Fine.
yeah, because Mike will tell us. I
But
think
do
it's
we
3
know
units or
how
more.
many ADUs have been created?
Not, but quite a few. I mean, I know many in Woodstock. And one was sold just
The ones I know about are being rented on Airbnb.
but there's this 2006 definition was put into play, and there was no money, there was no public money being
That's
attached to it. And so this is all the units that have been, all the mother-in-law apartment houses that have been sold since 2006 have not been that problematic, or we would have dealt with it much sooner.
Because it's just a room, and when I buy it, I can turn that room into whatever I want. I'm buying the house. This person is renting or not renting, maybe just staying there week to week. And it's still mine, I still control it. That's the difference between that and having a unit that is a rental unit to the public. The minute it is a rental unit to the public, you get a whole set of laws that govern evictions, fire safety codes, all of the rest of it. It's a publicly rented room is much harder to get people out of than that's why an awful lot of people are doing Airbnbs, because you only risk a bad tenant for 2 or 3 days, and you don't spend 2 or 3 months trying to get them out. Yeah, so
Yeah,
we may be making it worse by trying to make it better.
yeah, I mean.
I don't know, I think it's all
Senator
good.
Clarkson, Senator Harrison.
So put one in your house.
I would if I could.
I just wanted to point out something. I brought up Brattleboro's code.
Yeah,
And it does say, when it says, for ADUs, it says the administrative officer must issue a zoning permit for one accessory dwelling unit. So then it goes, and then one of the conditions is the owner will reside on the property in either the primary or accessory dwelling unit. Doesn't say how long
Right.
the owner must, and it says nothing about rental.
yeah.
So I can ask them how they deal with it, but it is
I remember when we talked about this
an issue.
last biennium, nobody had resolved like how long or what happens after. And so it is a permanent requirement. If you sell the house and they're following the law, then they will have to live in it as as the owner
Yeah.
if they're renting out.
Right, so this doesn't say rental, so if you took a super strict
Like even if it was
interpretation
your
of this,
relative, yeah.
you could say you have to tear the unit down if they rented the house, but
Yeah.
that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be the intent, but it's not clear.
It's not
In,
clear.
in other examples, like there's childcare facilities I just looked at, in houses, but there, in that instance, the
I've gotta go.
use
Oh,
regulates.
I'm glad you enjoyed the
Nominate
discussion so
chair.
much.
Oh, gee, we need to, yeah. So it's just,
Yeah,
there's more questions.
there are, yeah. If we keep this owner occupation restriction, there are more questions.
Right, right.
Take
Well,
off that job.
but it's also been here for a long time and it, you know, it's been in statute for,
So if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
so the public money is is what has added to the question here, because we have made it possible for people to take advantage of some of this huge amount of federal money that we have with low hanging fruit in a housing crisis, that we've been trying to develop more housing units. Use our housing units.
Oh, I just don't like informality in law that says, oh, it hasn't been a problem, so it
Well,
won't be a
I didn't
problem.
write that in statute, did I?
No, I think,
I'm just saying, it would, you know, often we
you mean
judge.
the
things-
original piece?
Oh,
I mean, I think it's time to look at it. that's
No,
all.
absolutely. But I guess I'm just saying that it has been complicated by our also promoting them and providing money to enable people to create.
We started promoting them because we have a housing shortage and there are lots of people who want to do this, and we're seeing it be a trend around the country, so it's time to deal with it. I don't really, it's immaterial to me how long it's been in place and that it's like semi-working. We need to fix it.
If you think it's broken. So we just disagree on that, but.
I think it's unclear.
I'm gonna call people that I'm fixing because
I
we're
just.
finishing
Thank
up.
you. Chris
Yeah.
Hoffman from the Department of Housing and Community Development. You heard testimony from a national ADU expert recommending against the owner occupancy requirement.
That was last
Yeah,
biennium.
because it was
Yeah.
exclusionary and discriminatory. We don't treat any other type of homes with this occupational requirement,
Mhm.
and he believed it was unfair. I believe it's unfair. I think we want to be able, we heard we need to be more welcoming to new people coming to the state. And I think this creates an environment, it's an environment that we need to create in our communities.
Yes, we did hear that testimony.
Yeah,
last
that was
year.
good
We
too.
did have a discussion about occupancy, and I think it's time to revisit that. Thank you, Mr. Pete. Wow, you're still here. We really appreciate that.
I think he's enjoying it.
After hearing our discussion, is there anything else you wanna add?
Well, I think removing the owner occupancy requirement would provide some clarity. There'd be less chance of people inadvertently, violating their local zoning ordinance. So, I think it creates more options for housing units. I think, my personal preference would be to remove it, but these are all certainly things for you folks to consider. So.
You've been extremely helpful in a very non-linear discussion, so we really appreciate that.
No problem.
I hope it doesn't impact your reputation, which is, very solid. So thank you for bearing witness
Yep.
to this.
Well, thank you
discussion and
thank you very much
Very-
for having me, and good luck with your discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yep.
We
Fred.
need it.
Thank you. Bye.
So we can end committee now. Is there any, does anyone else have to leave early? I mean, is there anything else people want to flag as we?
I think the one thing that I like to flag
Yeah.
is an overall issue that I'm not sure that we've dealt with as much as we could possibly deal with, and that's the issue of time. One of the things in all of the housing that we're talking about is it takes forever in
Yes,
Vermont to get anything done.
yeah.
And the whole issue of time, delay,
Mhm.
process
That's been nagging me
is
too.
something that we absolutely need to deal with. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not sure that we'll be able to deal with it effectively
Yeah,
in the amount of time we have, and whether or not we set aside either, whether it be some group
Mhm.
specifically charged with attacking that and coming up with a series of recommendations that we can act upon
Yeah.
about how to cut the time delay in each aspect of this, how to eliminate duplication,
Right.
how to move the process along, how to deal with the things that we see in the various inspections, particularly Act 250 inspection, in which you have a whole series of what appear to be uncoordinated inspectors inspecting, all of whom managed to go on vacation at exactly the wrong time
Yes.
to have
Yeah.
a project finished. It's this whole process
I know.
is just awful.
That's fair. Early on, I feel like people brought up New Hampshire a lot, or other states that had
That
shortened their appeals time, and I thought we might be able to have a pertinent, timely discussion about that, and it never materialized, and I agree with you, we really, I feel like that's left out, and we have some studies going right now that if we could say, please make sure that you come back with this specific information for us to tackle next year, or we can try and, I think we have.
Well, I guess that's the issue of, I don't know what the states are. Do we have a list of who's studying what and who's involved in the input?
Right.
Part of this, in terms of studies,
Yeah.
we would maybe look through NCSL and others,
Right.
as to what other states are doing. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But coming up with people who are taking a look at our process here
Mhm.
and with a critical eye to
Right.
how could it be improved. If you have the usual suspects doing it, I don't think it's gonna happen.
Right.
Otherwise, they'd have improved it already.
So
Right.
tomorrow we have Tom Stoney coming in.
Yeah.
That's next week.
Oh, it's not tomorrow?
No,
Uh,
it's Tuesday.
Okay, Tom,
The judge zoning.
the administrative
Yeah,
judge.
Yeah,
But
and
he's
that's
going to
that's-
talk to us
Yeah.
about the time
yeah,
frame.
that's
of
one
appeal.
piece of it, and
Mhm.
that's one,
But
the
that's one of
whole
the
appeal
pieces
piece
for-
is a big piece. But even if we look at what we heard today
I know.
about South Burlington, none of that went to the environmental court. This
Mhm.
3 years was with the local and just the beginning of Act 250.
Mhm.
And, when you sit back and you say, why does it take 3 years
Yeah.
to do something like that?
Yeah,
There's something wrong with our process.
right.
And his situation is not unique
Mm-mm.
from what we hear about Vermont.
Mhm.
That to be, we can do all the rest of this stuff on the periphery about ADUs and so on, but if we want to get housing built, we got to get it built,
Right.
not 3 years from now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're right. This does some of that. It doesn't get at the heart of it.
It nibbles around the edges, quite frankly. It doesn't deal with our, that to me is the heart of the problem,
Mhm.
is time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we may not actually be able, some of it we'll be able to control and some of it we can't. I have a developer in Woodstock who's been waiting for 5 months for windows. Windows.
Yeah.
I was struck. by
There
the-
is a bunch of, it's
But
complex, it's not
this thing
just
that we
us.
talked about here this morning, it's not the first time, had nothing to do with the supply chain.
Right.
This was solely administrative and legal, or administrative process.
And if you're having supply chain issues and then you get delayed and you lose all your workers when you get your supplies,
And the price, obviously,
we
when
can get out of the
inflation
way.
rises throughout, and so
Absolutely, right.
your initial estimate of what it's gonna
Mhm.
cost is way low, and we can see
Right.
with the rate of inflation right now, that this is also.
There were two areas where I really thought maybe there's something more we can do. One is, dare I say, what has come back in the building is de novo appeals on Act 250, which isn't local.
Yeah, yeah.
But the other, I was struck that after an election after there's a vote on a particular project or, decision, you can still appeal that after a vote. That struck me as, wow, like that, how much energy goes into a vote.
Yeah.
And then you can still appeal it. So those are two that come to mind that seem like there's language out there.
It just seems to me that we need a concentrated effort
Mhm.
and focus on how do we get this process to move faster.
Right.
And, having somebody give us a report a month,
Mhm.
6 months from now, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's so the answer.
Right.
But I think we should think through how this gets done so we get the right eyes on it, the right involvement,
Mhm.
whether it's an outside consultant, whatever, that we have a plan for improving the timeline with specific goals for doing.
Mhm.
that.
I have been concerned that it feels like we're hearing a major theme over and over again that isn't quite captured in the bill. So I'm glad you said that. Hopefully people have heard our discussion and have thoughts that they can bring us There are a couple avenues I think we can
I was
explore.
thinking of simply designating all of Vermont as a neighborhood development area and be
Yeah.
done with it.
There we go.
It'd be simple.
You can record that
direct,
section of
and
the
fast.
bill on the floor.
Or try something temporarily too.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
something,
another
yeah,
issue, is
temporarily, someone
recognizing
has-
the urgency of our
Yes.
situation
Right.
and waiving certain procedures for a
Yes.
certain period of time.
Yeah,
I like
mean,
that.
there may be things that we could do now.
right.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's explore it.
Yeah.
And let's also go to lunch, and think about this, but I do hope, I think you're right. I'm glad you said that. And if we can take more time next week to work specifically on that, if people feel like we're coming to some agreement on what's in the bill right now. So I think we did make a lot of progress today. And we do have Judge Stoney coming in on Tuesday, which maybe gives us a sense of, but that is still majority Act 250 is my understanding. And those the local pieces and the duplication we're trying to avoid the duplication piece. That I think is addressed because we are trying to exempt some areas from Act 250, more areas than just the 11 or 13 designated growth areas. But often we can get ourselves out of the way more easily than we can tell local government what to do. Hence, we're touching Act 250 in this bill, where they do have a strong local process. But sure, there's more we can do.
Well, among the things we could do is set timelines.
I've got to go do a couple things. We're still alive. Are we-
Yeah, I didn't want to
Yes,
take us
we'll
off
go
live
on.
until we truly were out the door to lunch, but timelines is something to consider.
That's what some other states have done.
Yeah, that might be what New Hampshire and other states have done, but I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
Okay.